is Anna with Folksy Tales, and on this channel I talk about stories. In particular, folk beliefs, tales, and mythologies. If you are interested in Tolkien lore, take a look at my channel, The Folksy Friend. Today we are talking about the German fairy tale, The Peasant's Clever Daughter. This story originated with the Brothers Grimm and their second edition of Children and Household Tales, published in 1815. Once upon a time, there was a peasant man who lived with his daughter. All they had was a very small house and no land. So when some land was cleared out nearby, he went to the king to ask if they might be granted this land to work on. And when the king heard of the poverty of this man and his daughter, he agreed to let them have this land. And so the peasant and his daughter got to work sowing the land and getting it ready to plant their grain. While they were sowing the fields, just so happened that they found a solid gold mortar, and the peasant wanted to take it as a gift to the king, to thank him for granting them this land to work on. But his daughter told him not yet. She told him to wait. They needed to find the pestle that went with this mortar, for surely if they went to the king with just the mortar, he would demand to know where the pestle was. But the peasant did not listen to his daughter. He took the mortar and went straight to the palace. As his daughter had predicted, when the peasant gave the mortar to the king immediately demanded to know where the matching pestle was. And the peasant tried to explain that that was all they had found so far, but the king simply would not hear it. And he had the peasant locked up and would only have him released when he produced the pestle. Which, it's the same, it's the same kind of feeling to me as debtors' prisons. How are they supposed to get what you want if they're locked up? Anyway. Day after day, as he sat behind bars, the peasant would cry to himself, "If only I had listened to my daughter." And the servants would hear this every time they brought him food and water, but he refused to take any. All he would do was sit and weep and say that he should have listened to his daughter. And in time, the king caught word that this prisoner was not eating or drinking, and he just would not stop yelling about his daughter. And so he had the peasant brought to him. And the peasant explained that the reason he was saying this was because his daughter was very clever, and she had warned him not to go to the king with only the mortar. And upon hearing this, the king said, "Well, if you have such a clever daughter, then bring her here." And when the peasant's daughter was brought to the palace, he told her if she was so very clever, he would marry her, but she had to prove it by solving his riddle. And she agreed to try. He told her, "Come to me not clothed, but not naked, not riding, not walking, not in the road, and not out of the road. And if you can do this, I will marry you." And so the daughter, struck with inspiration, knowing just what she needed to do, left the palace. She immediately flung off her clothes so that she was not clothed, but then wrapped herself up in a fishing net so she was not naked. She then hired a donkey and tied the end of her fishing net to its tail, so she was not riding, but she was not walking. She was forced to drag along behind the donkey. And she had the donkey drive only in the ruts of the road, so that her big toe was the only thing touching the ground. And so she was not out of the road, but not in the road. And she arrived like this, in her fishnet with her donkey, and immediately the king saw that she was a very clever woman indeed and agreed to marry her. I like to wonder what the people of the country thought of their new queen arriving in this fashion, but a deal's the deal. And so the king had the peasant released and he married the clever peasant's daughter. Years pass and they have a pretty good marriage. One year, the king was preparing for a military parade of all of his troops up and down his city. Near the palace, while all this preparation was taking place, there were some peasants that made a living selling wood. And one day, it just so happened that they were there at the same time. Each had a cart. One was pulled by horses and one by oxen. The man who owned the horses had 3 horses, one of which had a young foal with it. And while these woodcutters were just taking a break, they left their carts, and the foal got away from its mother and went and fell asleep in between the 2 oxen of the other peasant's cart. When the woodsellers returned, the man with the oxen claimed that the foal was his, that one of his oxen had birthed this foal, And the owner of the foal, the rightful owner with the horses, was, of course, furious. And so they got into a great argument, so vicious that they were eventually brought before the king to settle the dispute. And the king, not seeming to care all that much, simply ruled that the foal would stay where it was. If it was with the oxen, then it belonged with the oxen. Just doing the bare minimum there as king. Now, the rightful owner of the foal was devastated and upset. This was a big blow to him financially as well. And so he thought about what he had heard about the queen, that she had come from a peasant family and that she was a kind and good and clever woman. And he thought that she might help him. And so he went to her and he begged for her help in getting back his foal. Now the queen told him she would help, but only if he swore never to tell anyone that she had given him this advice. And he promised up and down that he would not tell anyone. And so she told him to take a fishing net, which she's a big fan of those, and stand in the middle of the road on the day of the military parade. And then he had to put up a great charade, a great performance, pretending to fish just on the road. And she told him what to say. The next morning, when the parade was going on, the king came across this man just fishing on a dusty road. And he had a servant go and ask the man what he was doing. He was blocking the parade and acting a little weird. And the servant brought him back the message. The man said he was fishing. And the king had his servant return to ask how he could fish with no water. To which the servant came back with the man's response: "It is as easy for me to fish on dry land as it is for an ox to birth a foal." I like this story. And of course, the king, being the butt of this joke, demanded that the peasant be brought before him. And he insisted on knowing who had put him up to this, who had given him this idea. And the peasant, to his credit, was true to his word. He refused to tell the king. He kept saying that it was his idea. No one put him up to it. But the king had him taken into a building and beaten within an inch of his life. And finally, under this brutality, he confessed that it was the queen who had given him the idea. And so the king of the year, returned in a fury to the palace and told his wife that she could no longer stay, she could no longer be queen. He would no longer have a wife that was so wicked and traitorous to him. But because of their many long years together, he would allow her to take the one thing in the palace that she looked upon most fondly. She could take that, and then she would have to return to her old, poverty-stricken peasant life. Maybe find that pestle and sell it for some money. And the queen graciously said that she understood if this was his will, and she hugged him, and she kissed him, and then she left him alone. That evening, before she set out, she brought to him a drink to bid him farewell, and told him that she harbored him no ill will. And the king, in all of his infinite wisdom, didn't think twice about drinking this mystery concoction that his now scorned ex-wife handed him. And to our infinite surprise, I'm sure, it was drugged. The queen had given the king, well, the former queen, had given the king a sleeping potion, and as soon as he drank it down, he fell into a deep sleep. The queen then had the guards carry the unconscious king into a carriage that she had waiting to take her back to her hut. And remember, she's not queen anymore, so they don't have to follow her orders, and really they're committing treason here, but it makes me happy to know that they did this for her. I don't think the king was very well liked. When she got to her little hut, she somehow got the king out of the carriage, inside, put him to bed, and waited for him to wake up. The next morning, when the king awoke, he was horrified to find that he was definitely not in his palace, and he called out for his attendants to come. But it was only the peasant's daughter who came, and she told the king that his attendants weren't there. And he demanded to know, furious, why she had brought him to this disgusting little hut. To which she simply told him, "You told me to take what was most dear to me, and that's you." And he cried tears of joy, and he told her, he didn't apologize. He told her that he would take her back and they would be remarried. She would be queen again, and they would live the rest of their days in peace and prosperity. And so it was. And that was the tale of the peasant's clever daughter. When I first read this story, I laughed out loud because I had a mental image of the former queen, the peasant's daughter, dragging the king across this grimy floor and dumping him into some straw, lumpy mattress, and then just sitting down to wait for him to wake up. And when he did, he would be looking across the bed, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory style, at the father-in-law on the other side. But that was just me. I think it's probably fair to say that she's super clever, absolutely. But also, he was a pretty bad king. I don't know that if he had been a wise and beloved king, if the guards would have just allowed a peasant to take him away from the palace. But anyway, this story is a classification of fairy tale known as the clever farm girl, which interestingly is the most common type of folk tale in Europe when it comes to clever type characters. And I thought that was super interesting because there are so many variations of this story, on a par with, say, Cinderella, which has variations everywhere. There was, I think, every continent I could find had a variation of this story. And not only that, but the idea of a clever woman having to answer a royal man, a prince, or a king's questions in order to marry him is actually an ancient trope that dates back hundreds of years in Asia and in Norse mythology, which I thought was interesting, especially because when I first read this story, I thought of it flipped. I thought of a princess giving a poor young man questions to answer. But then I really thought about it, and really the only situation that I can think of is Clash of the Titans, where Andromeda has to give Perseus the riddles to answer. And if you've never seen that movie, please watch it. The original, not the redo. Bebo is just a beautiful little creature that deserves all of our love. Sidetracked. I realized that really what I was thinking of is tasks. So it seems that when a young man, usually a poor young man, wants to earn a princess, he has to do tasks. Whereas if a young woman wants to earn a prince, she has to answer questions, which I thought was just super interesting. If you can think of any stories that are like that, either tasks or questions, let me know. I'm immediately thinking of The Queen Bee, which I did a video on that one, where the youngest prince of a family has to undergo 3 tasks to marry a princess. But overall, I love this story so much. It just made me happy. You know, sometimes fairy tales can be kind of nitty-gritty, and this one just made me laugh. And it also gave me the opportunity to find the best illustration I have ever seen at this point in my life. So behold this beauty. I spent more time than I care to admit laughing at that image when I found it. And on that note, hopefully you had a chuckle at it as well. I will leave things off for today. I will be joining you next week. I am not sure about my legend yet. I haven't picked out my legend, but I will be sharing a Russian fairy tale. So I hope to see you on Wednesday with our upcoming mystery legend, and then again next Friday for a fairy tale. Thank you so much for spending some time with me here today. Please subscribe if you want to. Let me know what you think. Give me suggestions for stories. I'd love to hear it. And I will see you next time.